Hey there, I'm pro player Matt Sperling. This is Magic the Gathering for advanced players. Today we're doing a Pioneer Manabase deep dive. We're going to go through a bunch of different specific deck lists and Manabases and show you how they were constructed, why certain choices were made, how you might tweak them or improve them, how you might do it if you were starting from scratch. My goal will be to get you to a place in Pioneer where you're not just copy pasting a Manabase, not looking at it, not improving it, feeling like you're lost, other than, hey, I'm going to go copy someone else's list. That's not really how advanced players are going to succeed in a tournament level. So we're going to go deeper. Let's start now. So the fetch lands are banned in Pioneer, and I think that's a good thing, but that's not what this video is about. Whether you agree or disagree, if you want to play Pioneer, you're not going to have access to these lands. What that leaves us with, at least most importantly, if we want to have our mana on turn one, these are the important options. So the shock lands loom really large. All the shock lands, you're going to pay 2 life, get them, whether you have something to do, you pay 2 life, you don't, they come in tapped. These are arguably the best lands. I mean, it wouldn't be very controversial to say so. So you're going to see these show up in a lot of different contexts in which we need more than one color, and we need it early and often. And whether we need it early or late, these are the versatile tools. Below that, you've got the pain lands, which show up only in the enemy colors in this format. In the upper right, you've got what are called the fast lands. They're going to come into play untapped on turn 1, 2, and 3. Critical tool, again, only available in enemy colors. Critical tool for those decks that are most interested in casting 1, 2, and 3 mana spells. It seems kind of obvious, but a lot of times players don't understand, am I building a 2 or 3 color deck? Which of these do I want? How many of these do I want? Well, you want to look at your mana curve, and the lower it is in the curve, the more you're going to want these fast lands. Below that is actually an even more extreme form of fast land. These only show up in the allied colors. These are the show lands or reveal lands. So these show lands, you have to reveal, let's say a plains or an island for Port Town. You're going to want to include that when it's really important to have white or blue on turn 1. And since white and blue, don't have those one-drop emphasis as often, that's actually going to be played less frequently than, let's say, Game Trail, where you easily could have a deck that wants to play Llanowar Elves and, Wild Slash, and Game Trail might be an option. Some players, have said, well, these lands in general, these are bad, they're not what I want to be playing. Look, nothing I'm going to show you today doesn't have a time or a place. Every land I'm going to show you, it has a slot. So Game Trail is seeing play. Foreboding Ruins, same thing. If I might want a Wild Slash or I might want a Thoughtseize, that might be a land I want. Fortified Village, I might have white 1-drops and green 1-drops, so that might be a tool that I use. So these are the important lands if you need to get out of the gate early, and then the shock lands are just the most important land in general. Next, you've got the check lands. Why are they called the Czech lands? Well, when Czechoslovakia split up, it split into the Czech Republic. Okay, no, that's not why they're called the Czech lands. They check for a basic land type. Forest, plains, in the case of Sun Petal Grove, each of these, all the pairings are represented here. They're all legal in the format. It's not just the enemy, it's not just the allied, they're all legal. I've repeated the picture of these rare lands from Throne of Eldraine because these also check for one type, and together these form a set of really powerful lands. If you can meet that requirement, which is easy to satisfy with the shock lands and with basic lands, they're really powerful. They come in untapped. They either provide 2 colors of mana with no pain, no hassle, or they provide 1 color of mana and a great ability in the case of those lands below. And basically, they just require that you have this in mind when you build your mana base, that, hey, I'm going to need to have a certain number of swamps if I want my castle Loch Thwains and my isolated chapels to come into play untapped, that sort of thing. So these become really important, and they don't make mana on turn 1, and that's really important. Should your deck, well, let's just say this. The more your deck needs mana on turn 1, the less it's going to be interested in these lands, just because there are things that can go wrong that won't give you that mana on turn 1. Other than that, these are going to be important pieces of different mana bases in the format. All right, so I teased these Throne of Eldraine rare lands. Here they are again. These are really excellent lands. I've got a whole bunch of different utility lands here. These are lands you include in your deck not because you need more than one type of mana or to fix your mana, but because you want your mana to do something extra. You want to generate a creature, an attacker in the form of Mutavault or a blocker. You want to, pump your creatures, Castle Embereth, all these different abilities. So I think that these throne lands are right up there in terms of power level. Some of these are extremely powerful. The black one, the blue one, the red one, the green one. The white one's a little bit far behind. I mean, it's not quite as powerful, but some of these are really critical. The green one is actually the centerpiece of a green ramp deck in some ways. That's ramping out, 6 mana, 7 mana creatures, green and colorless alike. So stepping away from those, Urborg, that actually can fix your mana, right? Because it can turn a colorless land into a swamp. So, your heavy black decks are going to utilize that in combination with some of the other lands in the slide to make those, like Mutavault, for example. You play Urborg, Mutavault, now you can play your 2 black spell on turn 2. Mutavault are maybe the most powerful land. That and Nykthos, those are in the running for most powerful lands that we're going to talk about. These are... Mutavault requires almost no setup. It just comes out of the box ready to go. It plays nice with any kind of tribal theme, and it's just they don't really print lands this good anymore when it comes to creature lands. One of the reasons they don't print lands quite like this anymore, they almost always come to play tapped, is because they want to avoid this awkward interaction that happens if you activate something untapped and it has summoning sickness. Now you can't tap it. So most of the modern in the last several years, creature lands tend to come to play tapped. We'll get to some of those in the future, but Mutavault's legal in the format. That's a really powerful land. Some of the deserts below, Ramming Up Ruins, Hash Up Oasis, you're going to play these lands when you need access to colorless mana to cast the Eldrazi spells. You might use these, or you just want an extra utility land and you're playing a monocolor deck. These will show up. On the right, you've got a variety of colorless lands, different, based on what your deck needs. You're going to pick one of these. There's a couple other ones, the Arch of Araska, which I don't care for. I didn't decide not to put in here, but I'd say all these have a time and a place. Some life gain. You may even have a suite of these if you have something that searches your deck for lands. So which one of these your deck, you're going to want to consult a list like this or do a search. It's going to be different. I mean, honestly, I think that Westvale Abbey is a card you might want in your deck to create, some life gain, convert creatures into evasion or a flyer or life gain. Obviously, Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, again, that's kind of a build around. You're probably familiar with that one. Rogue's Passage, maybe one that you're not familiar with. A monocolor deck that needs a way to punch through damage, let's say like a green stompy deck. If you can afford a colorless land or two, Mutavault would be a natural inclusion, but Rogue's Passage theoretically could be better, or you might want to include both. So these are some things to think about. A slower control deck can use tools like a Radiant Fountain, a Gaia Reach Sanitarium in small doses. Those can be really useful. When the new set Theros comes out, there's an interesting thing that Radiant Fountain does. There's a new white god that combos off with Walking Ballista. Whenever you gain life, you can put a +1/+1 counter on an artifact. And there's a thing you can do. Turn 3, you play that god. Turn 4, if you tap 2 of your mana, play a Walking Ballista. Then you play Radiant Fountain. That life gain trigger puts the counter on the Ballista. You can use the 2 mana, give the Ballista lifelink, and now they're dead. So Radiant Fountain may start seeing more play for that reason. So the first lands I showed you were kind of, what are the ways to go fast? And this time I'm bringing you, okay, what do you get if you decide to go slow? In this format, the enter the battlefield tap lands are the most playable. The creature lands we'll get to in a moment, and these. These are the scry lands and the cycle lands. The scry lands, you've got the full set, all 10. For the cycle lands, it'll only be the allied colors that have been printed to date. Don't be surprised if the enemy ones get printed at some point. That's a natural cycle that may be coming. For now, just your allied colors. It's really hard to figure out which of these is better for a deck, how often to play them. Obviously, it's going to be our slow decks that want these. I've found that the scry lands are most effective if my deck really needs to get to 4, 5, 6 mana. Then I think scry lands are a really effective way to make sure you get there, because you can keep those 3 land hands, and with a scry or 2, be a lot more comfortable that you're going to cast that 5 mana spell on time. I think the cycle lands are more appropriate in combination with those check lands that we talked about, because they're going to give you 2 types. The scry lands don't give you any types. These cycle lands give you 2 types, and when you have excess land, you can cycle them. So for me, this is a deck they're kind of mid-range in a way, because they're not going to get you your mana on turn 1, but they really help you along turns 2 through 4, 5, and then later than that, they're just going to cycle. So each of these lands, you might even play both in a mid-range deck. You might play scry lands in a combo deck because they can help you find, some of that key it's kind of like draw a card if you're searching for one particular card. So it's really important to understand which one's more important for your mana base. I do want to call out, I think those rare Throne of Eldraine lands do give a significant boost to the cycle lands. Because now, let's say for example, Fetid Pools. I'm much more interested in that land, given that it makes my blue castles and my black castles come into play untapped every time I leave with that. So as far as when I'm sitting down to build a deck, I'm kind of looking to play Fetid Pools. I'm not so looking to play Temple of Deceit, although I can certainly imagine playing either. They're both powerful. Here are those creature lands I talked about. The other payoff for going slow is usually worth more than a Scry 1 or the ability to cycle. These creature lands are pretty powerful. In particular, lands like Shambling Vent, Lumbering Falls, Hissing Quagmire. The non-red colors tend to be a little bit more interested in going slow in the first place, and then the ability to gain life is valuable. Lumbering Falls, something that can help a blue deck knock out Planeswalkers. These are lands that are certainly playable. I think you're gonna see them a little bit less, because sometimes those cycling lands, the ability for them to let the Eldraine lands, these creature lands don't play well with those check lands, so that's something to keep in mind. In the middle, you've got a land that does play well with the check lands, Fabled Passage. Fabled Passage is a land you're going to see a lot of play. It is going to see a lot of play in Pioneer. It's going to find whatever you need, and then of course on turn 4 it becomes a fetch land that's extremely playable. So it kind of again doesn't do anything on turn. You have to go slow with it. It's not going to get you your turn 1 mana, but it's pretty powerful on turn 4 or later. Spire of Industry and Aether Hub, probably the best, 5 color, if you really got to go wide. Aether Hub also works with energy strategies. So those you kind of know when you need them. If you've got energy focus or the ability to generate energy, then you're going to look to Aether Hub. If you've got a bunch of artifacts and some color mana requirements, Spire of Industry. Spire of Industry, particularly powerful decks that have, are touching some equipment and also have Scrap Heap Scrounge, or you can even get that in a deck without black. So Spire of Industry is a really powerful card. Comes into play untapped. Okay. The lands at the bottom, these lands they have both types, so you might think, oh, well, these play nice with the check lands, but they're just pretty poor in general. Without the Zendikar fetches, you don't have the ability to really rely on getting a bunch of different basic lands out in the early game. Yes, you have Fabled Passage, but, so these do play nice with Fabled Passages in a way. But then you've got a bunch of different lands that don't work on turn 1. They're all looking to play turn 4 or 5. So these tend to not be so powerful in the Pioneer format. Probably look to avoid them. Of course, like I said, every land I'm going to show you today has a time and a place, but these ones less so. All right, time to jump into the deck list, start seeing some of these abstract theories in action. Let's look at the way some of these mana bases are constructed, some of the choices, and let's think about how we might make different choices and maybe improve the list, maybe just make a different deck that has different needs and requirements. Okay, this mono black deck, you'll see a couple things coming into play. Urborg, along with 5 lands that don't make black mana, is going to unlock those. Double black spells or triple black. The fact that the deck doesn't have a lot of black or triple black in the 2 and 3 slots mean it's only going to play 1 Urborg to avoid that legendary rule. You might see a deck like this play multiple Urborg if it had a lot of that requirement, but it doesn't. Similarly, it's only playing 1 Nykthos. And why is that? Well, it's not really a heavy mana sink, heavy permanent focus strategy. Yes, it has a lot of permanence. Yes, it's got a decent number of black mana symbols. But if you're Sorening out a Champion of Dusk, at that point, that's kind of your perfect game state. You tend to be winning. It's the game states where you've only got 1 or 2 creatures out, and the rest of them haven't stuck, or you don't have that Sorin, you got some cards rotting in your hand, where your deck struggles. And so Nykthos kind of becomes win more in a deck like this, as opposed to a really important tool. Notice, before we turn to the next deck, which will be a different Nykthos deck, notice 4 copies of Castle Locthwain. You might have seen early experiences with this card. Oh, I'm going to play 1 or 2. It seems like it could be useful, but I don't want to get too risky with these Mutavaults here. This card is so powerful, however, that your aggressive black decks, it's not going to be uncommon that you see all 4 copies of that card. Again, powerful card, and you'll see deck builders, paying it its proper due. All right, on the other hand, here you have a deck that's so focused on devotion, so focused on those permanents that offer 2 green symbols or even 3, that it doesn't play Mutavault and is playing multiple copies of Nykthos despite it being a legendary land. So what's the difference? Well, this deck's more focused on permanence on the battlefield, really focused on devotion with Burning Tree, Emissary, and all these triple green spells. It's aspect of Hydra, another payoff for devotion. So it just has a greater emphasis on devotion, and so you're going to see it build its mana base accordingly. This is a no-nonsense, I want my green on turn 1. Okay, I'll take some utility in Hot Shot Oasis because, again, it's never going to delay my mana. It gives me that green mana right away, but I'm not going to start dipping into other stuff like colorless lands, again, like the Mutavault type of stuff to get additional utility. Instead, I'll lower the land count, 21 here, and I'll use Nykthos as a way to kind of ramp up. So this is a theme, obviously you're not going to be too surprised that aggressive decks play fewer lands, but you'll see some relatively aggressive decks in this format play more lands and rely on those utility lands to get some value out. Here you've got a different strategy, low land count, low amount of utility out of the lands, but Nykthos really shines. Alright, let's quickly do 3 more monocolor mana bases, give you 3 different flavors of those, then we'll start getting into 2-color mana bases. So the first, I want to contrast that low land count aggressive green strategy with the super high land count ramp green strategy. Even though we're the same color, other than forest, there's no overlap in terms of what lands we're choosing. So it's still kind of important to have green on turn 1, but not as important. You've got some elves, some grazers, so there's a decent number of forests, but Castle Garenbrig, a bunch of colorless lands, there's clearly a risk here of having to wait till turn 2 for your Castle Garenbrig to come untapped. Still, that's fine. If I gotta wait till turn 2, in some cases, I'll be able to ramp and catch up. That's the idea here. I've got 11 forests. Hopefully most of the time I've got on turn 1. If I don't, no big deal. I can always mulligan also. London Mulligan also helps your mana base in terms of how aggressive I want it to be. The colorless lands are really doing a lot of work here. It's a tutor toolkit when it comes to Ulvenwald Hydra. The 3 of those, I can go get any land. Something like Radiant Fountain to gain life, the Arch to draw cards, Blast Zone. And then a core Accelerant Shrine of Forsaken Gods, kind of a rampant growth for free, alongside Castle Garenbrig, another kind of rampant growth for free, on the way to Ulamog, on the way to Worldbreaker. So those are really important tools. So this mana base is constructed for a different purpose. 27 lands, super high count. With Arboreal Grazer, you cannot cheat in the land count because it's not ramping you if you run out of lands. So you got to go high on the land count, and of course you're going to need some utility out of the lands if you do that. That's how this mana base is constructed. And our final 2 monocolor deck looks kind of just showing that this is not a green specific phenomenon, or black specific, right? It's 2 aggressive strategies in mono red. I'll show you this one that's got a higher land count, 26 lands in our deck with red 1-drops and shocks in the form of Wild Slash. Even so, the lands Ramming Up Ruins and Mutavault are powerful enough that this player chose to play 26 lands in a red deck. It obviously makes it more like a red mid-range type of strategy, but the labels serve the deck. The deck doesn't serve the label, so call it whatever you want. But what it is a red deck that's got an ability to get up to those 4 and 5 mana spells you see in the far right column on a consistent basis, but not be hopelessly lost at sea when it draws a few too many lands. And that's what these utility lands let you do. So a really powerful deck in the format, and a really important concept that comes out of some of the principles we talked about earlier. If you can get value out of your lands, it means you can play more and be less frustrated when you get flooded. Contrast that with the Sandy Dog, low to the ground, burn style red strategy, really emphasizing 1-drops, in addition to Eidolon of the Great Revel, a critical 2-drop that you really want to show up on time that costs red, and you see a no-nonsense 20 land, they all come into play untapped, they all generate a red mana right away, mana base. The goal here is not that, when I flood out, I'll have utility for my lands, it's just have a lower land count. Now, Ramming Up Ruins is so powerful, it lets you play both ways. It gives you that mana right on time, and it gives you something to do when you flood out. So that's obviously a critical tool for this deck, but in general, the mana-based philosophy is the low land count, mana on time, not a lot of utility from the lands. Our first look at a 2-color deck stays with the 20-land, really tight, almost everything's going to come into play untapped on turn 1 with the exception of Sulphur Falls. This is a mana base that's constructed this way not because it's super fast with a million aggressive 1-drops, but because it's got a bunch of cantrips and card draw, and it can operate on 2 or 3 lands, certainly, but it also intends to play more just by virtue of drawing more cards. Treasure Cruise, Opt, Chart a Course. These are cards that are going to find more lands as the game goes longer. They want those lands to come in to play untapped, and a colorless mana risks not doing a whole lot when you want to do things like Opt, Lightning Axe, Wild Slash. Okay, there's 3 spells. I get my Arclight Phoenix back. Well, you really need all your lands to make colored mana in order to do that on turn 3, for example. So here you'll see a mana base constructed with that in mind. Could this mana base spare something like Castle Vantress? I mean, possibly, but you don't really want that because it costs a lot. Again, it's not about utility from the land. It's about low land count. I can even discard extra lands with this deck, something like Lightning Axe or Izzet Charm. And so this is more about a condensed mana base and an efficient package. 2 Sulphur Falls, 3 Shivan Reef. Let's talk about it. So Sulphur Falls here, normally I think it would be quite strong, but Spire Bluff Canal and Shivan Reef don't play nicely with it. It's easy to have a combination of these cards if you've got a sufficient number of them, and so I think Sulphur Falls it gets the short end of the stick for that reason. Shivan Reef isn't a 4 of here because that life you pay, if you're using that for colored mana a lot, and we already mentioned how you are in this deck, it does start to add up. The second one you draw can get really painful, so 2 or 3 seems like a sensible number, and it's not like it has this, the kind of upside of, Fiery Islet from the modern format. So I think this is a reasonably constructed mana base. Not the only way to build it, but this seems reasonable to me. Spire Bluff Canal, certainly the best of the lands. Steam Vents in second place, and 4 copies of each of those. Now let's take a look at a 2-color deck that really goes the other way. Instead of 20 lands, we've got 25, and a deck, instead of planning to operate on 2 or 3 lands, a deck that really wants to step all the way through to 4, 5, 6, playing cards like Sphinx's Revelation and Dig Through Time Elspeth up top. Here, what's interesting to me about this list is the emphasis on coming to play untapped lands. There's really no concession made to a slow land, so whether it be a cycling land or a scry land, you're just not going to see it here, which is interesting. It's not obvious to me that that's correct or that's where I would start. But I think that's probably a concession to, having these 1-mana cycling cards and really wanting to play on curve. And, if you have to wait to Opt or then wait to Azorius Charm, you can kind of fall behind. So I think this player probably feels like Castle Vantress in particular allows the deck to scry and kind of, with Castle Ardenvale as well, get enough utility out of the lands without the need to go slow. So that's interesting. Another thing is this player has shied away from lands that make colorless. Only 1 Field of Ruin, 1 Gaia Reach Sanitarium. That's sort of a minimal package of lands that produce colorless mana as opposed to a white or a blue. And I think that's a concession to playing 4 Absorb. Absorb costs white, blue, blue. There's no room for a colorless there, so you can get stuck. And that's going to be obviously extremely costly if you've got to change your game plan because you drew an extra Field of Ruin, and that can be very costly. So I think, again, it's not like we're going to construct some ideal blue-white control mana base in the abstract, cut and paste that into the next list. That doesn't work that way because not every list is going to have 4 Absorb or these cycling cast-outs. So that's a lesson here. When you're copying and pasting a mana base, that's often not good enough if you're not thinking about why is this mana base constructed the way. So I think this exercise, looking at what this deck's playing in terms of spells, what it's trying to do, how costly it is to take a break from the curve, I mean, you're going to learn something from that, I think. And if you do have to copy paste into a new white-blue deck, maybe you want to build a white-blue deck, but it's a tribal deck, it's a spirits deck or a merfolk deck or whatever it is. It's not going to be good enough to just copy paste. So this is the exercise, and I think this list highlights that quite nicely. Let's change colors, but stick with the theme of 25 land in a slower deck, and see what it looks like if a player does make a concession to going slow in some context. But this is a mana base I really like, and something I think we're going to learn a few different lessons from. So first of all, you see Blast Zone here selected as the kind of colorless utility land. In the last list, you saw Field of Ruin, Gaia Reach Sanitarium. I think Blast Zone is a smart choice here because you've got a lot of 1-for-1 kind of targeted removal. Harness Lightning, Dreadbore, among others. But what about go wide strategies? Someone assembles a board against you. Oftentimes it's hard to catch up one thing at a time. Glorybringer, Chandra. There's a lot that just kills one thing on the spot, but not 3 things. Blast Zone, a utility land selected from among the many options that we highlighted earlier. in an attempt to kind of harness in some of those, go wide strategies. Okay, I'm going to narrow that board down with a blast zone. So I like that choice. It's interesting to me. The other thing is that here we finally see this thing I've been talking about, right? These cycling lands that they play really nicely with the Eldraine rare lands and the Czech lands. So here, 4 Dragonskull Summit, 2 castles, with 4 Blood Crypt, 3 Canyon Slough. Now we've got really a lot of basics, and a mana base that's kind of going to be humming along in terms of coming into play untapped despite those Czech requirements. So I like that. And then, of course, the fact that some of these lands cycle and some of them draw cards means flooding, because my mana curve here caps out at 4.5, 5 mana, depending on which cards I happen to draw. I'll be able to cycle or draw a card with the castle. So I like this mana base. The Aether Hub is a specific concession to the card Glint Sleeve Siphoner, so that we get to see that for the first time here. So a lot going on, and I think a very intelligently constructed mana base. Is it perfect? I'd like to see a temple or 2 in here. I think you want to get to 5 mana with Glorybringer in your deck, and that's a card that can help you. So but you can't squeeze everything in. Maybe Aether Hub being in the list with Glint Sleeve Siphoner means there's no room for that cycle land, and I can appreciate that too. So something to observe there. We're going to take a look next at a different style of red-black with different choices. This next look at red-black is interesting because we look at the mana base, it looks like we're looking at a straight red-black deck when you start to look at those duels, but you actually look at the list, it's mostly a red deck touching black. And so Unlicensed Disintegration's a 4 of. Scrap Heap Scrounger has an activated ability. You don't even need to have black mana to utilize Scrap Heap Scrounger, but eventually you'll want to find a black mana to get it back. So one question I have is this too much black mana? And I think it's very possible that this is too much. Like, for example, could this player, take out a couple Foreboding Ruins and put in a red land or utility land even, Could this list afford, a couple Mutavault, even though it does have Goblin Chain Whirler? So we have a mana base here focused, kind of, laser focused on casting Goblin Chain Whirler and never missing that with 3 lands out, but also being able to touch black with some, relatively easy come into play untapped with the exception of the 1 Canyon Slough. So this is an interestingly constructed mana base. It's not where I would take it. I think there's some room to give, and I think you'll see decks with Goblin Chain Whirler willing to put a couple Mutavault in at least, if not 4, and say, look, yeah, some of the time I'll have to wait a turn for that Chain Whirler. That's true, but the other hand, I'm going to have an extra land to attack, and at the end of the day, this is a deck that's attacking with 3/2s, attacking with 4/3s, and that extra land is going to have value. So maybe this deck wants to even go to 25 land, get some more utility lands in there. A couple things to look at and just say, okay, I'm not seeing a lot of utility from the lands, even though there are 24 of them. Only one of them cycles and none of the other ones have any abilities. That's probably not good enough. Could there be some red castle? These are all questions you want to be asking when you see a mana base like this. If you're going to copy paste it, hey, is this mana base, does it have too much black in it? Does it have enough utility for a 24 land deck with an aggressive bent? I'd say no. This would be a mana base I'd be looking to tweak. Alright, let's take a look at our first 3-color mana base. Are you ready? Pause the video if you need to catch your breath. Wow, things are going to get complicated quickly in 3-color mana bases in Pioneer. Again, there are no fetch lands. Go fetch my shock. That's a simplifying effect in Modern. We don't have that. So what you've got are a lot of choices you can make between these check lands, creature lands, shock lands, basics, fabled passage. Which of the castles can I afford to play? Which is the right choice for my deck? How many lands? Is it 25? Is it 26 with a deck with the curve this high? These are all valid questions. Here, I think this is kind of the fundamentals of, this kind of shard mana base with, you got one of the allied creature lands in there. You've got some, so the enemy creature lands, allied check lands, and a lot of shock lands, which is going to be a feature of these mana bases. Just like in Standard right now, in Pioneer, your shock land is still your bread and butter, but it's it's a lot more costly to have 10 of them than it is to have 4. So when you go to 3 colors, things get a little bit wonky. When it comes to even the fast lands, it's a lot harder to have 8 than to have 4 if you're thinking about how often they're going to come into play tapped. So there is a give and take here. I like that the slow land is the Shambling event, which can gain life. Obviously, life gain is going to be important if we're taking this much damage from our mana base. And it's a valid question. Was it worth touching black in order to get access to these spells, Murderous Rider, Oath of Kaya, Thought Eraser, versus the blue-white deck that we saw earlier? Well, the mana base is a big component of why it might not be worth it. Now, I'm not saying it's not worth it, but if you're new to the format, you're thinking, well, it sounds great to have Thoughtseize, Thought Erasure, whatever. Yeah, it sounds great, but look, this player's chosen to not even play the full count of Thoughtseize, because really, if you start to play 10 shock lands, 4 Thoughtseize, a couple Murderous Riders, you're just not gonna beat red very often. You're not gonna beat any aggressive deck very often. So there's a price to be paid when you add the third color, but there's also your complexity of the mana base goes way up, and there's choices to be made. Field of Ruin and Fable Passage, lands that can fix your mana in a pinch. In the case of Field of Ruin, Fable Passage does a pretty good job. Maybe this is a list that wants to lean heavier into Fable Passage. I don't know, but I'm starting to get nervous looking at this mana base, and so something to be aware of if you're spanning 3 colors. The format is not super welcoming, I should say, to the 3 color mana base. The last list we're going to look at is from Wedge as opposed to a Shard. So Wedge, Sultai has more enemy color combinations. It's going to have access to more of these fast lands if it's trying to play on curve 1, 2s, and 3s. It's going to have less access to some of the stuff that's ally color exclusive, like the cycling lands. Here is an interesting mana base because you're maxed out on these fast lands, Botanical Sanctum, Blooming Marsh, and Attune with Aether is a mana fixing card, so you want to have your green early, and those happen to be green. So there's kind of like this thing, like an Aether Hub as well. There's this nice feature of the deck that these lands that scream out at you, okay, I come into play turn 1 and I'm ready to go, work with Attune either, and a bunch of them work with Thoughtseize as well. Watery Grave, Overgrown Tomb, the shock lands are included as a concession of Thoughtseize. Those fast lands can all cast Attune with Aether. So the lands kind of work together in that sense. For Aether Hub, obviously in an energy deck. Winding Constrictor also works with Aether Hub. But there's this basic energy and Constrictor synergies in the spell base. That's what the deck does. And it informs the mana base. 22 lands and 4 Attune with Aether. It's kind of like 26 lands, and none of them are really utility lands. The deck can flood. And, maybe it is a land heavy, who knows, but it has nice mana sinks with 4 Walking Ballista and the Scarab God at the top. Remember, when you've got extra lands, it's not just the lands themselves that can provide utility, it's also what are your mana sinks. Well, the Scarab God, you can keep using your mana. In fact, it rewards you for getting to 9 mana, which sometimes does happen if you're flooding out, and certainly making that 8th land drop is valuable. And then Walking Ballista, it's going to be useful at every even point along the curve. So this is another thing to think about. Mana bases don't exist in isolation. That's a recurring theme we keep coming back to. Certainly with the energy deck here, the mana base that won't even make sense outside of the spell base that includes into with the Aether. So fast lands like Blooming Marsh and Botanical Sanctum, they're not going to be as effective if this curve looked slightly different and had a bunch of 4 mana planeswalkers or creatures that were high impact. Now you got to start to think, is 8 too many? How often is that 4th land I draw one of these? Now I'm off curve. Well, this deck is clearly not as worried about that. It's made some concessions in terms of which spells it's selected. It's kept things under 4 mana in order to capitalize on that, and so that's why it works. Thank you so much for watching today. If you enjoy this content, please subscribe, hit that notification button. That way when the next one comes out, you can learn something from that video too. Hope you learned something today. Check me out on Twitter over at SickOfIt. And wish me luck in the Rivals League. Happy New Year, everyone. My goal for the first half of the year is to try to put some of the stuff I'm teaching here to practice at the pro level and do well in the Rivals League, make MPL. So wish me luck. Support me over on Twitter. Support me here on YouTube. I really appreciate it. Thanks again.